So welcome everybody to Park Strips class. The goal of this class is to teach you guys how to retrofit your current park strip from an all-lawn park strip to a low-water, gorgeous park strip full of perennials and lots of interesting different things. This is kind of in conjunction with our Local Scapes program that we've been teaching that is focused on helping homeowners design, install, and maintain landscapes that are good for Utah. And park strips are no different, right? We're not from New England or the Northwest where we get a lot of rain. We don't really get a crop and we don't really have gardens unless we irrigate. And irrigation in Utah can be kind of a bugger. And we're going to talk a little bit about how irrigation really influences what we should be putting in our park strips. So we're not haters on grass, but we believe that grass should be used in more responsible ways. And the reason is because grass typically takes a lot more water, a lot more irrigation to stay green than other types of plant material in our yards. So I'd say that around 90% of turf or grass that you see in northern Utah is what's called cool season turf. So these are our bluegrasses, our fescues, our rye, anything like that is a cool season grass. So these grasses really do well. They do best during the cool parts of the year. So we see them growing up really quickly about this time of year, March, April. They look awesome through May and most of June. And then as soon as it gets hot, they start to go dry, right? They go kind of a straw yellowy color. And this typically isn't the grass dying, it's just the grass trying to go dormant. Eventually it will die if you don't irrigate it at all, it's going to eventually die. But when we just see that yellowing happening, it's because it wants to go dormant. It wants to go dormant during the hot parts of the year, and then it perks back up in the fall. You know, as soon as it cools off in September, October, it looks really good again, right? So to keep our grasses from going dormant, we have to add a lot of water. And our irrigation systems, particularly spray type heads, which is what we typically see, and rotor heads for that much, are not really designed to irrigate areas that are less than 8 feet wide. So, you know, our park strips, which are the areas between the road and the sidewalk, are typically anywhere from 3 to 6 feet, maybe if you've got a wider park strip. Sometimes, you know, we'll see exceptions like when you drive around downtown Salt Lake up in by the university and stuff. Some of those park strips are quite wide, 8 feet or wider sometimes. But typically in our area, most new construction, most older neighborhoods, the park strips are around 4 to 5 feet. So it's really hard to irrigate those. As you can see in this illustration, we have a 5 foot wide park strip with heads that are every so often, probably every 5 feet or so, 5 or 6 feet. And you can see that as they're spraying out towards the road, if you adjusted them so they only sprayed up to the road, you'd get dry spots between where the radius of the spray was hitting. If you were to extend that out so that the entire park strip is being covered, you'd be spraying in the road, which is not a very water efficient thing to do. And we end up with areas like this. This is a very typical thing that we see as we're driving through Utah neighborhoods. We see that there are a lot of dry park strips during July, August, first part of September before it cools off again. And I'd say 99% of the dry spots we see are because of irrigation inefficiencies. And so this is what the irrigation industry has come up with to try and mitigate. This is a park strip spray head, and we see these quite often in newer neighborhoods or people that have retrofitted and tried to be more water efficient in their park strips. These heads, you alternate them on both sides of the park strip pointing towards each other, and they spray in a kind of a pizza slice shaped pattern out. And so the idea is that hopefully if you alternate them, then you're going to get fuller coverage. And this is better than most spray heads, I'd say, but it's still not an incredibly efficient way to water grass. And so you're still going to end up with some dry spots. And why not grass? There's no functional value to grass in the park strip. we encourage people that if the only time that you're on your grass is when you're mowing it or edging it, it might be a good place to consider taking the grass out. And we really don't want to encourage our kids to be playing in the park strips, right? Or our animals using the park strip. And it's just because it's not safe. And it's, you know, it's just not safe to have kids that close to the road. So we don't really want to encourage our kids to play out there. So why have grass in the park strip? It's not doing much for us aesthetic wise. So this lady, she went through our Localscapes design series and she retrofitted her yard, and this is the before picture, right? So you can see that she has a very attractive looking yard to begin with, but the park strip really isn't doing anything. Like, it looks okay, but would it look any better without a park strip? No, it'd look almost exactly the same. So typically having all lawn in the park strip really isn't doing anything from an aesthetic standpoint at all. Grass is also pretty sensitive to salt, and we live in Utah where we have these crazy hot summers, but then we turn around and have these incredibly cold, wet winters. So what do we have to do during the wintertime? We have to keep our sidewalks clear of snow and of ice. And so one thing that we commonly do here is we put down salt to try and break up the ice. And salt can cause the soil to burn, you know, any plants that are in a salt heavy soil often burn, and grass is no exception. So as we add salt to the sidewalks, that moves off into the park strip, and can cause some pretty serious damage, as you can see in this picture. And this is it's a study that was done by Utah State University. And basically, the higher that number, you can see that number that says ECE, that's just electric conductivity, and that's just an indicator of how much salt is in the soil. And the higher the number, the more salt, and these are different grasses that have been tested to see how much salt they could handle before they started to look bad. And you can see that Kentucky bluegrass is on the low tolerance list. Both an annual bluegrass, so bluegrasses really are not hardy. They're not very tolerant when it comes to salty soils. So most of our grasses are cool season, most of our cool season grasses are bluegrass, most of our park strips are lawn, and it's just kind of a recipe for salt burn in the springtime after we come out of the winter season here in Utah. And grass is a high maintenance crop. You know, sometimes when we talk to people about the concerns that they have with a high perennial density yard, lots of trees, shrubs, grasses, perennials, one of the main concerns that we hear is maintenance and cost. Cost is the other thing that we hear often, but maintenance is often seen as an issue. But typically, if you've got the weed system down, which we're going to talk about, I'm going to teach you guys how to keep the weeds at bay. If you've got that down, you will spend much less time maintaining flower beds than you will grass. You know, every Saturday in the summertime, what are we all out doing? We're out mowing our lawns. And in park strips, it's a lot of maintenance in that there's sometimes not a lot of grass, but there's a lot of edging that needs to be done. You know, we're often encouraged to fertilize here in Utah. So there's fertilizing, there's mowing, there's weeding, there's edging. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be maintained with grass that we don't have to do quite as much of when it comes to perennials. But like I said, we'll talk about that. So hopefully I've convinced you that grass is not the way to go when it comes to what to put in your park strip. So now we're going to talk about how to go through the process of converting your park strip from an all lawn park strip to a low water, gorgeous, lush, perennial park strip, or whatever you decide to put in, just not grass. So the process, here we go. The first step is picking your design. And we always encourage, before you do anything in your yard, check your city code. Nothing would be worse than if you took a bottle of Roundabout and you killed all the grass in your park strip, and then the city came after you'd done a bunch of work and told you had to put that grass back in, right? So most cities in our area don't require don't have many requirements. When it comes to your park strip, you're kind of allowed to do whatever you want within reason. The city does usually own that piece of property between the sidewalk and the road, but you are responsible for maintaining it. But they often keep their utilities in that park strip. And so some of them, you might say, well, I'm not a fan of grass now because Janice has convinced me it's not a good way to go, but I don't want something that I'm going to have to maintain at all. So I'm just going to pour some more concrete. It'll just be an extension to the sidewalk. A lot of cities frown on that because of the utilities that are in the park strip. And if they have to do maintenance, they'd have to break up the concrete to get to it. So just check your city code and make sure that you are in compliance with whatever it says. If you're not sure where to find that online, what I found is that when I've had questions about city code, you just call the city, and usually they can tell you really quickly if there are restrictions, or they can point you on where to go to find any restrictions that your city might have. So I've got this picture on here of two guys that are fighting. Bad neighbors, good neighbors, who knows, right? Who knows their situation? But one thing that we like to encourage people is, you know, be a good neighbor when it comes to your landscape. So I once worked as a gardener down on Temple Square, and my supervisor had a really gorgeous yard, right? And he had a fish pond in one corner and a bench by the fish pond where he could sit and enjoy watching his koi swim around. But then his neighbor, just kitty corner to him, decided that he was going to put his compost pile right across the fence from where my supervisor had this gorgeous pond and this cute bench and stuff like that. And it smelled so bad that he couldn't even use this fun spot in his yard. So just be cognizant. That's kind of like a story that doesn't have anything to do with park strips, but it illustrates the point that we want to be good neighbors. And so maybe if you live in a community with a ton of kids or something, don't go putting like yuccas and cactuses and things that are going to catch an ankle, or if the kid falls off a bike, is going to really do some damage. So just be aware of your surroundings, right? If you live in a neighborhood where there might be concern, just think about those things. Obviously, we're all about people doing their own thing and setting a new style. We found that as people change up their landscapes, oftentimes neighbors will follow as well. So your neighbors are going to see how great your new park strip looks, and they're going to want to do the same thing. And anyways, so we're all about that, but just be good neighbors. So we're going to go through a couple of different park strip designs and talk about some specific plants just for fun, and to kind of get you guys thinking about what you want in your park strip and kind of how much material it's going to look like for you to do. So this website is called localscapes.com. It's a really, really, really good website when it comes to park strip designs. So this is one of the park strip designs found on localscapes.com, and you can see that it kind of does a lot of the design work for you. So for a 30-foot area of park strip that is 4 feet wide, you're going to want 80 thyme plants if this is the look that you're going for. So you can take any of these designs that we're going to be talking about, and there's a plant list right at the bottom that you could take into your local nurseryman and say, I want these exact plants. They could help you find them. You could go home and have this same look that we're seeing on these different designs. So this is, if you kind of like the look of lawn, but you're not up for actually having lawn because it's, like we already talked about, it's kind of lame. This is a great alternative, whether you want the flagstone or not. So thyme is a really, really good plant in our area. It's relatively drought tolerant. It can handle a little bit of foot wear, not a ton, but it can handle quite a bit. And it's kind of reminiscent of lawn, right? So if you live in a neighborhood where you're wanting to kind of match and everybody else has lawn in their park strip, this could be a good thing to do. You're going to get some pretty cool purple blossoms in the springtime or late spring. And then every time you walk on this, you're going to get hit with this gorgeous smell of thyme. Really pretty. You can put some flagstones in there to kind of break it up and provide people a way to walk across the park strip. We always encourage that people include paths in the park strip because people are going to walk across it, whether you have a path there or not. But if you include a path, you're going to direct the traffic so people won't walk across your plants. They're more likely to go through your park strip on the path. So add some pavers, add a path. It looks really good. I love this one. We're putting in a new ground cover display here in a couple of months, and we've got a couple different types of thyme. And I just think it's really great. So in this design here, it's really nice. Everything is a shorter plant. So one thing to really think about when you're designing your park strip is height. So some city ordinances will specify, they'll say, you know, we don't care what you do in the park strip. You just have to make sure that the plants aren't going to be over 24, 36 inches tall. And that's just for safety. You know, if you were parking or backing out of your driveway and your park strip is full of tall plants and you couldn't really see what was happening in the road, that could be a safety hazard. So be cognizant of that as well, and don't put crazy tall things in the park strip. But here we have some really good examples of low water, gorgeous perennials that you're going to have something blooming all season. So we're going to go on the left side first. The Sonora Sunset Hummingbird Mint is probably in my top favorite plants of all time. Not necessarily the Sonora Sunset, just hummingbird mints in general are amazing. They do so good in our area. They're gorgeous. They bloom from probably end of June, first part of July till frost almost. The hummingbirds love them. That's why they're called hummingbird mint, and they smell really good. So if you're out and about and you're weeding and you are weeding up next to the hummingbird mints, it's kind of a sagey, minty type of smell, and it's a gorgeous plant. They're super pretty. They do awesome in your park strip. Then we have this pine leaf penstemon. So pine leaf penstemon comes in both yellow and red, and it's a penstemon, which penstemons are a Utah native plant. We have more native penstemons in Utah than any other state has, and so if they're native to Utah, it, you know, stands to reason that they're going to do good in Utah landscapes. So they're going to stay kind of shorter than most other penstemons. They get bushier, really thick, nice display of color for a longer period of time. And then we have on the right side of the screen, there's this Hyde Coat True Lavender, and lavenders do really great. They're native to the Mediterranean area, so dry and hot seasons, just like we have. And they do amazing in park strips. They're going to stay nice and small and compact. They don't require a lot of maintenance, but they do require some. So before the next season's growth happens, you're going to need to go in and dead off all of the spent flowers. But they are kind of nice because if you're into herbs, you're into good smells, you're into floral arranging or whatever, potpourri, you can take those flowers and use them in different applications. You would want to harvest them in the fall if you're going to use them indoors for other reasons, but you can leave them on through the winter time. Just make sure that you get those old blooms clipped off before new ones start to grow. And then we have a coreopsis plant below that lavender plant. Coreopsis are a lot of fun. A nice big flush of flowers. This one doesn't need to be deadheaded. You can just kind of let it go. It's going to fill in the area without taking the area over, so it's not going to be like an aggressive weed, but it'll fill in. Lots of color for a long period of time. So, and this is just a principle to be thinking about. So we might talk about some of these designs and you're like, well, I like some aspects, but I want to kind of do my own design. One thing to really think about is as you're picking out perennials, make sure that you have perennials that will be blooming throughout the season. So most perennials don't bloom from spring to fall, but if you can stagger the bloom periods, right? So you can select 1/3 of your plants to bloom in the springtime, 1/3 to bloom in the summer, and 1/3 to bloom in the fall. And that way you'll have nice color all throughout the year. So here's kind of a minimalist design. We've got some nice gravel, some larger gravel, and that is one thing that you probably will see in your city ordinances is they're probably going to dictate what type of ground cover you can use, or mulch you can use in your park strip. Some will say no to bark. Some are going to specify that if you're going to use it, it needs to be bigger, and that's just for city maintenance, because if we get a crazy rainstorm and it washes over your park strip, it's going to wash a lot of debris down the storm drain, and if your mulch is too small, it can get caught in the current and go right down the storm drain, which means you're going to have to replace it, which is going to be high cost to you, but then the city is going to have to take their time and use their manpower and resources to clean out the filters. So just once again, read your city ordinances. But this is a really nice look, and some people kind of opt for nothing in the park strip, and that's totally fine. Just a good looking, nice, clean gravel is a really good option. But here we've got some nice plants that we're going to talk about. So we have two different types of ice plants. So ice plants are just succulenty ground covers that are incredible. There are so many varieties of ice plant out there. It's almost amazing. And they're going to get a flush of color around the end of spring, first part of summer, and the whole plant is going to be covered with really cute blooms, but then it's going to just have a few blooms for the rest of the year. So you're still going to be getting some color from when it's done with its flush of blooms till the frost. So that's kind of fun. And then this hardy yellow ice plant, the one on the right hand side, is kind of nice because it adds some fall interest in that when it starts to get cold, the little leaves that are usually a bright green in the summertime turn kind of a bronzy reddish orange color. So that's kind of fun. And then it comes out of it and goes green again in the springtime. But that's just, you know, a little bit of winter interest. And when you're designing anywhere in your landscape, whether it's the park strip, whether it's just some flower beds out by your house, whether it's your, you know, anywhere in your yard, it's a really good thing to think about. Well, it's really good to think about what the yard is going to look like in the wintertime when all of the perennials have died back to the ground, when all the leaves are off of the tree. Are there some things that are going to help there be interest in the yard? And so the hardy yellow ice plant does add some winter interest. And then we've got this blue oat grass, which is an amazing grass for the park strip because it stays so short. So when you're designing, once again, anywhere in the yard, and you're thinking about what plants to add, really consider ornamental grasses. We're going to talk about a few of them. And the reason they're so good is because they're going to add a different texture into your flower bed, into your park strip, into your yard. This kind of light, fluffy grass texture that you're not going to get with most perennials. And then the final plant that we have on this slide is this fire chalice. And this one's a really good one, really drought tolerant. It's going to spread a little bit without taking over the world once again. It stays really short and it has a really long bloom period around the end of summer through fall. This one is one of my favorites, Lush with Less, a really lush looking park strip with using less water. That's the point of this one. So we've got some new plants, all new plants to talk about, except for that hummingbird mint, which we've already talked about. It's one of my favorites, so we should all go ahead and buy it. But then we have this Brake Lights yucca. So I think that most of us, when we think of the yucca plant, we think of the ones that get really big in our yard, and over time they kind of die out on the bottom. And we currently have some in the garden that have voles living underneath of them, which that's been fun to try and manage. You know, and the typical yucca that we're thinking about, the ones that we have that have the moles or voles, they get those big white flower stalks on the top of them every summer. But there's some smaller ones that do really well in the landscape and look really good. And red yuccas are really cool. They stay really small, they stay compact, and they're going to get these single stalks of red flowers that last a really long time. We've got a couple of other flowers. This moonshine yarrow is a really good option. So yarrow has a bad rap, I think, and I'm going to try and convince you that yarrow is still a good plant to use. So the straight white variety, the wild variety of yarrow is a little bit weedy. Some people say it takes over the world, and some people don't like that, and that's understandable. But most of the varieties that have been bred for interesting colors and compactness are not going to spread like that. You're not going to have just a new weed in the park strip. So moonshine yellow yarrow is a great option. The sundancer daisy is a fun little plant. So it does reseed itself but it comes up in cute, cute, cute bunches right around the parent plant. And it's one of those, again, that's not going to become weedy. And it's really fun because it typically doesn't need any water after establishment. And so what we've seen in our learning garden here is that we've got a couple of Sundancer daisies, and they've just kind of, you know, slowly spread one clump at a time to areas that don't need a lot of, or that don't have a lot of irrigation, and they do really well, and they bloom forever. They bloom almost the whole entire season, so they're kind of a fun one to add. And then speaking of ornamental grasses and things that add a lot of winter interest, these Blaze little blue stem grasses are a great option. They're going to stay relatively compact, and the picture that you see on the bottom right hand side is what it looks like in the wintertime. So it's kind of a bronzy, orangey color, and that looks really good when it's up against white snow. So another thing to think about. And then below that we have this Walker's Low catmint plant. It's not a true catmint, so you're not going to have the cats trying to do their business on it, but it smells good. It's kind of got a minty smell, kind of like the hummingbird mint, and the bees love it. It is an awesome pollinator plant. So is the yarrow. So is the hummingbird mint. So this would be a really good park strip to think about, or to take elements from if you're wanting to encourage bees or hummingbirds or butterflies into the yard. That Walker's Low catmint does a good job. So this is a really pretty one. I really like this one. This is for a shady park strip. So you can see that there is a plant here that looks like grass without being grass. So once again, if you like that look and you've got a shady park strip, but you want it to look like grass without being grass, the Turkish speedwell is a great way to go. It has really deep green foliage, like was what we're seeing right here in the picture of the park strip, most of the year, but it's going to get a absolute adorable flush of light blue flowers on it. And it almost looks like lawn. It can handle a little bit of foot traffic. Like, I don't think it could handle much if you're like, I'm going to replace my whole yard with this stuff, and the kids are trying to play soccer on it. I don't think it would manage that. But for people just walking across the park strip once in a while, it would totally do fine. Some other flowers we see here, really good shorter perennials. You can see that whoever designed this kind of went for a high density planting in the cool tones, right? So we have a lot of blues and purples in this park strip. So we've got hardy geranium, which is not related to our annual geraniums. So we have the annual geranium, and then we have these hardy geraniums, their other common name is cranesbill. Most people know them by the name cranesbill, but they do amazing in our area. Really good shade plant. Rocky Mountain columbines do really good in our shady areas as well. They do great in a park strip. Really, any columbine actually would do fine. And then we have this blue plumbago, which is a really fun ground cover that you can use anywhere in the area. And my favorite thing about this, and the Turkish speedwell is kind of the same, but a lot of blue plants in our area, the tag's going to say blue petunia, and is it blue? No, it's a dark purple. A lot of things that claim they're blue really are purple. So whoever designed this, they picked true blue plants. So the hardy columbine is an actual blue, and the Turkish speedwell is an actual blue. But this blue plumbago is a blue. Like, it is a bright blue color, and it looks so good because what you have is the new foliage comes out as kind of reddish. So you have the reddish new foliage, the green older foliage, and then these brilliant blue flowers, and they're just amazing. And they do great in sun too, so you could use them either way. So this is a park strip design that, if you really like the minimalist look, which I think this looks really good, this could be a way to go. It's going to use very little water, but it's still going to look really nice. And so these are junipers, the icy blue juniper, and junipers, I think, have a little bit of a bad rap because they were so overused a few decades ago, right? Like, everybody had junipers, and they had the bigger ones that grew wild and out of control, and people would take their hedgers to them and shape them and into weird looking hedges, and they, you know, they kind of fell out of popularity for a while, but there are some really cool new juniper varieties that are being bred, that are being discovered, that do really good in the area. And these icy blue junipers are one of those varieties. They're going to do really good. They kind of have a sorry, a bluish green icy lighter color, and they're going to stay really flat against the ground. So this is another option where if you want kind of a low growing spreading green ground cover, these junipers are awesome. And as you can see, for a 30-foot park strip, you only need 4 plants. So for a 60-feet park strip, you only need 8 plants. And junipers, for the most part, because they're easy to propagate, and because they're not that like popular, they're pretty inexpensive. So this could be a really inexpensive park strip as well. Let's see. So this one's kind of a fun one. It's got a lot of different things in it. We have the icy blue juniper, as well as that little blue stem that we were talking about. And this image that you're looking at is later in the summer. It's the fallish time where this plant is starting to turn color. But then we have 2 new perennials to talk about. This wildberry coneflower. So coneflowers, also known as echinacea, do really, really good in the landscape. They do great in our area. They do need full sun. They like it hot, but they're gorgeous and they bloom forever. And then when they're done blooming, you have these interesting seed heads that the birds just love in the wintertime. So you can keep them around if you want, or you can cut them back if you want, if you're into, you know, the clean look through the wintertime. But they do good. A lot of varieties get really tall. A lot of varieties stay really short. This wildberry coneflower is perfect. And then below that, we have the Stella d'Oro daylily. And these are the ones that you see used a lot in, like, when you're out grocery shopping and in the park strip of the grocery store parking lot, they might have some daylilies. And they're typically these daylilies. They do great. They stay small. They're compact. But the thing that makes them really outstanding, in my opinion, is that they have a flush of bloom that just keeps on going. Like, they will maintain a blossom for a good chunk of the summertime, where a lot of other daylilies, you'll have a good solid 3 to 4 weeks of blooming, which is still a long period of time compared to other perennials. But these Stella d'Oros just really keep going. So they're a great option to put into the park strip. Maybe you're interested in trying something a little bit funkier. Maybe you're not into grass or ground covers or perennials even, or ornamental grasses, or maybe you kind of like the idea of putting something really functional in the park strip that you can use, that you can eat. So watermelons love well-drained, hot soils. So park strips can be a great place to put watermelons. So the one on the picture on the left-hand side with all those flags, we were doing some irrigation maintenance. So don't worry about the flags. It was just, and this is our park strip at Weber Basin. So the last few years, we've gone through some construction. So this particular part of our park strip is gone, but we've planted melons out there and it's been very successful. So if this is something that kind of speaks to you, go for it. You know, then on the other side, the right side, there's more melons in the park strip, but you could put squash out there. It could be an extension of your garden, especially if you have a wider park strip. There are some vegetables that aren't going to handle the salt, but a lot of them will do okay. And so it could be a really fun extension of your vegetable garden. And it's kind of nice because if you have a smaller vegetable garden, or you're trying to grow vegetables in boxes and you're running out of room, just stick them out in the park strip. It'll be fine. You know, they'll love it out there. So this is a favorite plant of ours here at Weber Basin. And the reason for that is because these are some of the lowest water plants ever, but they look great and they bloom forever. And I just realized that I have an older copy of this presentation. So if you get onto weberbasin.com and go to our classes and events tab, there's a spot where it'll say like view old presentations here, or old PowerPoints. And so if you look up the PowerPoints for this class, all of these slides will have plant names on them. So I apologize that I don't have them here in this video, but they will be online. So this is a desert 4 o'clock. And so these are a plant that really literally needs 0 water, except for when it's first year, when it's trying to get established. But once it's established, you can just forget about the park strip. I mean, a little bit of weeding here and there, and they do reseed, but typically they're another one that's gonna reseed a little bit, but they're not gonna go crazy, right? Like you're not gonna be battling a new weed in the park strip. But these plants are great, and like I said, low maintenance. You don't have to deadhead them. You don't really have to worry about them. And then in the fall time, they're going to die all the way back to 1 large taproot. There's 1 taproot that goes straight down from the middle of the plant. So you can see in this park strip example, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 of these going down the length of the park strip. And there are only 5 plants filling up that large area. And so they're going to die right off. They just like break off when they're ready in the fall time, and you pick up the whole plant by the base and just put it in your garbage can. It's like a big tumbleweed. It's perfect. Super nice. They come in purples and pinks. You might have to think about things like your elevation. I love this park strip. This is a park strip that's, I think, here in Davis County. I can't remember actually now that I think about it, but either way, it's local. It's in northern Utah, and this park strip is amazing. You know, it is really good looking. If you look at the park strips that are just past this one, could you imagine trying to mow those? That would be such a pain in the bum to try and get your mower up there. So a great thing to do is put a little bit of rock terracing in and add some drip irrigation and add some plants that are going to be good for erosion control. And I just love this park strip. Whoever designed this did a really, really good job. This is a great option. So like I said before, if you're into just the clean cut look and you're not interested in having anything in the park strip, you're not going to worry about irrigation. Maybe you don't have irrigation in the park strip and you're not really into the desert 4 o'clock look. Just rocks can be a great way to go. And another thing that you could put into the park strip would be bulbs. I should have put a slide in here, but bulbs are really cool when it comes to irrigation, because bulbs literally need 0 water at all, no additional water. So they're going to get all that they need from the winter time. They're going to store it all in the bulb, and then in the springtime they come up, they flower, they're gorgeous. You will have to remove the plants once they've died back all the way to the soil, but then the following year, they're going to get whatever moisture they need from the snow. They're going to swell up, store that all in their bulb. They're going to grow, bloom, look gorgeous, and then die back in the late spring to early summer. So a great option if you're looking for a 0 water plant. And this one is really nice too. You know, they've got some trees in there to kind of break things up. This slide, I just found this on the web, but is illustrating how important it is to not pick tall plants. So if you were backing out of a driveway and couldn't see past, you know, the neighbor's dog could be in trouble. So once you've got your design picked, the second step is removing the grass. And we always, always, always recommend that people call the blue stakes before you start ripping up anything, especially in your front yard, especially in the park strip, because like we already talked about, the park strip is owned by the city, and they've probably got the majority of the utilities going into your yard in the park strip. So just be really careful. Don't accidentally hit the gas line. Don't hit the power line. That'd be really bad. And if you hit something because you didn't call blue stakes, you are responsible. But if you hit something after you've called blue stakes, then oftentimes they'll pick up the cost of the damage. So it's really important. It's kind of an insurance policy to make sure you don't have to pay if something happens, because you've done due diligence. So the second step, like I said, is removing the grass. You've called blue stakes. Now we are going to actually remove the grass. And there are a couple of things you can do. This is a sod cutter. You can rent them. I have no idea how much they cost, I'll be honest. But you can rent them for a full day or a half day from Home Depot or Lowe's or somewhere like that. The nice thing about using a sod cutter is it's very efficient, very quick. It just slices off the grass. You can then take that grass and put it other places in your yard if you want. But yeah, it's an easy, quick way to get rid of grass. You can spray it if you're not opposed to chemicals. Roundup is a really great way to go. Like I said, if you don't have issues with chemicals, like, use Roundup. Roundup is really nice because it acts relatively quickly. You are going to have to wait a few weeks after you've sprayed just to make sure that all the grass is dead. Grass, if you don't get rid of it, like if you leave grass roots in there, the grass can grow back, and grass can become one of your worst weeds in the flower bed if you haven't efficiently killed it away. So you can spray it with some Roundup, let it sit for a few weeks, make sure it's good and dead, and then you can either rake it out or you can even just till it in. So yeah, and Roundup there are a couple of chemicals you can use, Roundup or glyphosate. Glyphosate is the chemical name. Roundup is the Kleenex name, the brand name, but that everybody knows this chemical by. But you can buy off-brand Roundup for really inexpensive that works just as good. But it is inactivated by the soil, which means that once it hits the soil, it's no longer active. So it's still there, which, there's always big debates about chemical, but it's no longer active. So it's kind of nice too, because there's not a huge turnaround period from when you spray to when you plant. So one thing to be really cognizant of, though, with any chemical is that it will kill whatever it touches, right? So here's just an example. It's not a park strip, but somebody used Roundup to get rid of some grass for a flower bed, and they had a little bit of drifting. And I have done this before. I've been spraying Roundup in our garden and totally just took out some perennials because I wasn't really paying attention to where the spray was going. So that's the hazard. You have to be careful. Don't use any chemical if it's windy or if it's too hot. Like, follow the label. This is one of I feel bad laughing about it because Utah State is very near and dear to my heart. They're my alma mater. It's where I got my degree. But it's just funny because they're the state agriculture school. They have the best horticulture program. Super good staff, super amazing horticulturalists that run their campus. And this was just a few weeks before, well, this picture wasn't taken a few weeks before, but they accidentally sprayed Old Main, which is the iconic hill on campus. This is at the foot of the Old Main building, with Roundup instead of weed killer. They meant to put a wide broadleaf weed killer, like a 2,4-D or something, in the boom sprayer, and somebody got confused and accidentally put Roundup in there, and they killed off one whole half of Old Main Hill. It's too bad. I thought, it's just funny though. But the point is that you have to be careful with chemical if you're using it, and read the label. If you do not read the label, you are violating law, and nobody wants to do that. So just read the label. It'll be effective. Sometimes it's kind of a pain to read through and figure out how many ounces per gallon and how big is my sprayer and how many ounces per cup. But just to be safe, always read the label and comply to the recommendations on there. So another great way to remove the grass is the newspaper or cardboard method. So take newspaper or cardboard that doesn't have a gloss, no color. Make sure if you're using cardboard, you've taken off all of the packaging tape, and you can lay them flat, cover it in mulch. You could just get it wet so that it sticks, but that could look pretty trashy, but covering it with mulch is a great option. Then wet it down and let it just sit, and it'll smother and kill anything underneath of it. This one does take a while. So it's another 2 to 3 week method to get rid of grass, but it's a good way to go. So, and then really, once the grass is dead and it's broken down, you could just go through and dig right down in through the mulch and the cardboard and plant your plants right in the mulch. You don't have to worry about getting rid of the grass or anything. It'll all just break down together. So a good way to go. Now we're going to talk about irrigation. So once you've got your design in place, you've removed the grass, you've you're just ready for irrigation now. And so park strips are a great place to start retrofitting your yard away from being a 100% turf grass, because typically what we see, and this isn't always the case, especially on older homes, but oftentimes park strips are on their own zone. And we always recommend that if you're not spraying a dense ground cover area, like, so if you were doing the park strip that was 100% that time ground cover, that first slide that we looked at, the first of the park strip designs, if it were me, I'd probably leave in some kind of spray system, whether it was a drip spray or whether I just left my spray in there and then really cut back on the watering. It would probably do fine. But for the most part, you're going to want to always irrigate your perennial beds, flower beds with drip irrigation. That is going to cut down so much on your weeds. It's going to be, you guys will be amazed. But when it comes to drip irrigation in our area, if you have secondary water, which means that you are pulling the water straight from the street right onto your yard, it hasn't been filtered, it hasn't been treated by your city or by a treatment facility, you're going to want to make sure that it is adequately filtered. The one big complaint that we have when it comes to drip irrigation is that people often have the heads clog. And the reason that their heads are clogging is because there's a lot of sediment in secondary water, and the heads, like the emitters, they just have the tiniest little openings for that water to come through. And the reason the water is so cheap in Utah, if you compare the price of secondary water to any other state around us, it is crazy how cheap we are. The reason it's so cheap is because literally your secondary water goes through a filter, like I think it's a 1/2-inch filter, and then it goes straight to your yard. So there's not a lot of processing that's being done to it, not a lot of cleaning, but that's why it's so cheap. So make sure to filter. Here's an example of that filter. And we're gonna see. Yeah, so there are two different types of drip that we recommend. This first type is called Netafim, or inline drip. So Netafim is another brand name, but there are a lot of different brands you could go with. Once again, it's inline drip, where each of these hoses, you're gonna go through the park strip, and this is an example of the Netafim going through the park strip. And then you can see that every foot or 18 inches or so, there's a hole that will just slowly soak water into the ground. And most of these are 1 gallon per hour or 2 gallon per hours. You know, you can kind of get whatever you want. But then you can plant your flower beds or your perennials in the grid that you're going to create in your park strip. Like this is a good example. So this is a flower bed. You can see that the inline drip is going through. It's set about 1 foot apart, and the idea is that you're going to let it soak for an hour, and it's going to soak the whole area. So this is really good for designs that are really high density. So like that shade planting that we were looking at, that's just super high density. So this actually would be a good option for that time lawn replacement as well. So a good way to go. One thing that I would be aware of is oftentimes what we found is that plants do better if they're planted right up to the opening. So but you can puncture in and take an emitter from the line straight to the base of the plant if the plant is having a hard time getting enough water. But just be aware of that. That's why this particular designer curved those instead of doing straight grids, is because she just wanted a more natural looking pattern and wanted to put her perennials by the drippers. But like I said, the intention is that you do wet the whole area. So this is what that looks like. This is that lady that I talked about who during the doesn't add an aesthetic to the yard when we were talking about why not to have lawn in the park strip. This is what her final product looked like. She went with a succulent bed, looks super great, high density plantings, went with that inline drip system, very successful. The second type of drip that we recommend is called point source drip. So this is better for perennial beds that are lower density planting, right? So like that juniper one that we talked about that had just those low growing junipers, the 5 or 4 junipers. So basically what you would do is, you can see that there's that thicker hose looking piece of pipe that has the green stripe on it in kind of the background of this picture. It's kind of slightly faded. So that's just a I forgot what it's called, a poly pipe. So it's just a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch poly pipe. You run that from the source, which we're going to talk about how to convert, straight down the park strip, and then from there you just plug in these emitters, and then either an emitter or a little barb fitting. You just poke it in, and then take a spaghetti tubing and take it to the base of the plant, and then you're going to put it right at the base of the plant. And this is the best for weed control because you are not irrigating the area between the perennials. And the reason this is so effective is because, like, what do all plants need to survive? They need water, they need nutrients, they need sunlight of some kind. Some don't need that much sunlight, some don't need that much water, but they all need it to a certain degree, right? And so if you're not irrigating the area between your perennials, then there's not going to be that water to help weeds germinate. So that's really going to cut back. So this is just another example, a different color of that poly pipe tube that's running through the flower bed. And then this person has so what they've got is they've plugged the actual emitter that controls how many gallons per hour are being let to the plant, right into that thicker poly pipe. And then they've got the spaghetti tubing going straight to the base of the plant, and then they have what's called a bug cap. Because like I said, if there's one complaint we have is that these do get clogged. Most of the clogs will be taken care of by filtering the system adequately. But sometimes there are other things that'll just crawl right in like little bugs. And so they have these caps that you can put on that help with that. For the most part, so we have a 2-acre learning garden here, and almost 100% of it is point source drip. And we have very few problems with bugs. So I don't really worry about the bug cap. What we do is we put it's called a barbed fitting, and it's just a spiky little piece of plastic that punctures into the that poly pipe, and then you put the spaghetti tubing right onto that, take it to the base of the plant, and then we put the emitter right at the base of the plant. But it doesn't really matter. There's not really a right or wrong way to do that. But if you are having issues for some reason with clogging, and you think that you've adequately filtered stuff, maybe bug caps could be a good way to go to help mitigate that. So this is an example. We're going to start talking about retrofitting now. This is a example yard, kind of like that first drawing that we looked at. They've got spray heads on one side of the park strip spraying out towards the yard. There's 11 or 12, it looks like, now I have to count them, 12, 13, 14, 15, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 15 spray heads that are spraying out onto the park strip and probably spraying out into the road. So an easy way to fix that is you can literally go into your sprinkler supply store, say, take a picture with you, or even like unscrew some of the sprinkler heads, and say, this is what I have. I need some caps and I need some tools so that I can add poly pipe or inline drip right onto a sprinkler head. And they'll just hand over exactly what you need. So there are caps that you literally unscrew your sprinkler head, screw on the cap, and then it's done. It's capped. No water is going to come out of those sprinkler heads anymore. So in this image, those orange circles represent heads that have been capped. And then the red circles are heads that have been retrofitted. So once again, we're going to take we're going to take a look at some pictures. But literally, again, you just unscrew the sprinkler and you screw right on this retrofit head. So you literally don't have to do any digging. You don't have to wonder where the pipe's going or where it's coming from. You just unscrew and screw it back in. And then that dotted dash line that's going through is representing drip irrigation tubing. So that could be some kind of inline drip if that's what you want to go with, or that could be the big fat poly tubing if you're going to do that point source drip. Could be either of those. So here's what those retrofit heads look like. So they're super cool. Like I said, you just screw off your sprinkler head, screw on these these new retrofitted thingies that are going to help you be able to connect the poly tubing right into that new retrofit head. So this is what it looks like. Here's kind of a more rudimentary one, but very effective. It just off it goes. Here's another example. If you've got the pipe sticking up in the ground, there's a lot of options. I would just take some pictures and go into your local sprinkler supply store and say like, hey, I want to cap a lot of my park strip heads, and here's what I've got. Oh, I'm going to hand it to you. Oh, you're going to hand me back exactly what I need. Oh, perfect. And then I want to retrofit into a half-inch pipe tubing or a 3/4 inch tubing, whatever. And they'll help you get all set up. Or if you want to do point source drip and you don't want to deal with pipe, they make these incredibly cool heads that are literally just, you put the spaghetti tubing right into them and you run that spaghetti tubing straight to the base of the plant, and then you put an emitter on the end. And that's literally it. That's all the retrofitting that you have to do. If you need every single one of your spray heads, you know, if you buy ones that, like this one has 6 different ports that you can add a spaghetti tube to. So this particular sprinkler head will support 6 different plants. And sometimes you might have a plant that requires more water, so you just put 2 emitters to that one plant. So like sometimes shrubs or trees or something, rather than putting in a whole nother system specific for trees and shrubs, people will just add a few more emitters instead, and that works just fine. So if you've got, you know, right now you've got, because math is hard, we're going to say 10 sprinkler heads in your park strip, and you are doing a design and you're going to put in 60 plants, and you like this option, then use every single one of your sprinkler heads. You know, buy 10 of these little retrofit heads, screw them on, and then you've got as much as you need, and it's perfect and it's super great. And a lot of these heads, so I should also mention that spray heads that are used to irrigate grass are often engineered so that they require a lot more pressure. Drip systems can't handle a lot of pressure. If the pressure is too high, you're going to have heads being popped off and breaks happening in the connections. And so you might have to put a pressure reducer on the beginning of your system if you're putting in a new drip system. But a lot of these types of retrofit heads have pressure reducers built into them, so you don't have to worry about that, which is really nice. And this fourth step, after we've got the design done, we've got the grass removed, we've got our irrigation system at least planned, we're gonna look at adding organic matter to the soil. So if in like the process, whatever, if it were me, if I was putting in, I would actually probably add organic matter and then do the irrigation system. I probably should have swapped those, but just because you don't want your irrigation system all nice and laid out and you're like, okay, what's the next step, Janice? And it's like, oh, add organic matter. Well, shoot, how am I going to dig all this in with my netafim going through my flower bed? So we always recommend that you add organic matter whenever you have a chance before you plant anything. And the reason for that is because it is so hard, to add organic matter after things are planted, after you've got the mulch laid down, the irrigation system's all nicely laid out, the flowers are planted. It is so hard to go through and add organic matter. And so here's just some examples of clay versus sand and how water reacts as it percolates down through these 2 different types of soil. So sand particles are huge. I think I have, oh no. But anyways, so sand particles are massive compared to little tiny clay particles. So if you think about it, you can pick up a grain of sand and see it with your naked eye. Clay particles are so small that you can't. And so and clay particles are also kind of difficult because they're kind of it's called the platy structure, where they're flat and long, right? And so they kind of stack on each other, and it makes it really hard for the water to percolate down through. Where clay soils, it's like a bunch of basketballs in an area. You pour water on that and it's just going straight through, right? So everybody that has clay soils think they have the short end of the stick, and everybody that has sandy soils thinks they have the short end of the stick. This illustration is just showing how much longer it takes for water to percolate through clay soils versus sandy soils. So as you can see, it takes a long time, basically. That's fine. That's all that you need to know about this slide. But here's an illustration about why adding organic matter matters so much. So here we have sand particles represented in those brown blobs, silt particles, which are represented by those gray blobs, and then the clay particles are represented by those brick-looking long rectangle shapes. So this is not proportional. If it was proportional, the clay particles would be a lot smaller, but just for the illustration purposes, that's what they've decided to do. So basically, when you add organic matter, which is represented by the green line that's binding everything together, we're taking all of those separate soil particles and we bind them together to create aggregates, which is just a combination of all of those different particles, and they hang on to each other. And what that does is, so if you have a clay soil, you've gone from this platey, weird stacked structure to like more porous or larger structures that are more porous. So all of a sudden you're gonna have much better drainage. If you have sandy soils that's just letting everything go, the organic matter holds on to water a lot better. So people always ask us about how to improve soil. The answer is always organic matter. And so I guess I should kind of clarify what organic matter means. So we're not talking about organic in the way that, you know, like buy organic eggs or eat organic beef or, you know, invest in organic crops. You know, like organic in this particular application doesn't mean without pesticide or herbicide. What it means is matter that has carbon in it that was once living, that's been broken down into what we call humus or humate. So, yeah, it's humus, not humate. Humate's very different. But it's this glue that adds things together. So it's like leaves that have been allowed to break down, mulch that's been broken down for a long time. You can buy these in bags from any nursery. You can do your own if you have a compost pile, and we're going to have class on composting and soils a little later in the year. That's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to talk about how to get that really prime organic matter to add to your yard. So add organic matter. It's a really important thing to do. So what I would recommend, and I feel like this is a pretty common recommendation for most professionals, it's like if you look on Utah State's website and everything, that's what they're going to recommend is 1 to 2 inches more if you can, and then process or dig it in. It does take a long time to change soil. You're going to see immediate results from doing this, but it's not going to change the texture of your soil for a long time. So just be aware of that. But once you have everything laid out, once you've got all the organic matter mixed in, you've got your irrigation system in place, you're going to start thinking about planting. And so when you plant, there are some things to think about. And the first thing is plant selection. So with selecting plants, you're going to want to really look at your piece of property. So if your park strip is in full sun, buy plants that are adapted to full sun. If your park strip is full shade, buy plants that are adapted to grow well in full shade. We always tell people that you should be picking the right plant for the right location instead of trying to adapt your location to fit a specific plant. We see that people do this quite often. They might have a favorite perennial of all time and they just really want it in their yard, but their yard is 100% shade and they just can't have it. We can often find replacements that'll look similar and have a same type of fill, maybe the same texture, the same color, the same bloom type, but it's not the exact same plant. And so it's much easier to just buy the right plant instead of trying to change your environment. So, I mean, there are some things you can do. If you've always wanted a vegetable garden and vegetable gardens need full sun, cut down a tree. I think it's a great thing to do, but you just have to be really wary, right? Like we live in Most of our area is zone 5 or zone 6. We have some 4, zone 4s up like in the valleys. But for the most part, we're zone 5 and zone 6. So if you live in zone 5 or 5B, don't buy plants that are recommended for zone 7, hoping that if you put it in the right area, it'll do okay. Just buy plants that'll do good in your area, and it's gonna really decrease the maintenance. Buy plants that you know are gonna do well. I actually don't remember the purpose of this slide. Basically, planting is good. Oh, hydrozoning, that's what this is for. So when we're planting, when we're planning our design and we're picking out plants and we're starting to lay things out, one really important thing to do is make sure that all of the plants on the same zone need the same amount of water. So in this example, we have really, really low water plants, right? We have this bright edge yucca. It's a smaller version of the yuccas that we often see in our yards. We got some sedums, the lavender we talked about, oregano does great, primrose, sage, artemisia. All of these are very low water plants. So it just makes watering so much more efficient, because what happens, let's say that you've got a low water perennial right next to a high water need perennial. And so they're on the same irrigation system, they're on the same zone. So what you water one is what the other is gonna get. What that does is causes you to overwater one or underwater the other. And typically what we see is that if one thing is going to happen, people are going to choose to water to meet the needs of the high water plant, which means that the low water plant is going to get too much water. And sometimes that can be okay. Like sometimes plants will function fine getting too much water, but a lot of low water plants, especially if they're fleshy, or have a, developed, they've evolved over time in low water situations, they can't handle having what we call wet feet, right? They can't handle having their roots constantly in moist soil. And then their natural adaptations are going to be compromised, and they're going to be way more susceptible to disease or pests or anything like that. So hydrozone everything, put everything that needs a lot of water in one zone, everything that needs less water in another zone, and plan your yard out that way. It'll just make things so much easier. We're going to talk a little bit about trees. I think I'm kind of running out of time. Oh, I sure am. So just be wary of what trees you put in the park strip. This is something that can be greatly influenced by your city code. They oftentimes will have a list of approved trees for the park strip, because they don't want to see this happening. Nobody wants to fall because there was this mess going on. So we've got a tree and a sidewalk, and between the two, the roots will always win. You're going to get heaving if you plant a tree that's not good for the park strip. So here are some of my favorites. One, like I said before with the Desert 4 o'clock, the names of all these will be on the actual slides that are posted online. So this is a paper bark maple. They stay relatively small. This is on a lot of approved tree lists. And I know all these pictures have grass in the park strip. People will learn over time. 5 years, take this picture again, no grass, right? Hopefully. But paper bark maple is really fun. Stays small, gets great fall color. Its name, paper bark maple, comes from the fact that its bark kind of sloughs off in flaky layers. So it just adds another level of interest. So in the wintertime, you're going to have kind of something more interesting to look at in your yard. Instead of just a regular barked tree, you're going to have a paper bark tree, which can be kind of fun. This is a golden chain tree. These are really cool because once again, they stay pretty small and compact. They're long-lived trees too, which is nice. They bloom in June, roughly. So it's kind of fun because most of our flowering trees bloom really early in the springtime, but these golden chain trees and the golden rain trees are kind of similar in that they bloom in the middle of the year instead of the beginning of the year. So that just adds some more interest to the tree varieties that you have in your yard by choosing something with a different bloom period. These are so pretty, so underutilized. Everybody ask your nurseryman for one and put these in your yard so we can get a good supply here. These are Japanese lilac trees. Kind of different, super pretty. They do great in our area. They're going to stay smaller. They're going to not do any damage to those sidewalks, and they look at how good those look. I think they're super, super pretty, and they're more of a spring to early summer bloomer. They're going to bloom for the most part probably right after like your crab apples and other things have finished blooming. Crab apples, pear trees, flowering pears, flowering plums, a lot of those do really well as well. I just wanted some other options because those other trees you've probably seen quite a bit, but I don't know if you guys have seen Japanese lilac trees very often. So things to think about. Once you've got everything planted, you're going to think about maintenance. So, and like I kind of said at the beginning of the class, the one thing that people are concerned about when they think about taking out lawn and putting in perennial beds is the maintenance time that it's going to take. So, and the main maintenance that people are worried about is weeds. So the way that a lot of people want to combat weeds is by putting down this weed barrier fabric, which is no longer recommended. It hasn't been recommended for the past several years, and there's a very specific reason why, or a few reasons why. And the first reason is that it kind of changes the biology of the soil. When we tear back these weed barrier fabrics, we find that the soil underneath has not really gone through its normal processes, and it's dead compared to the healthy soil around it that hasn't been covered up for years. It doesn't break down very well over time, but it will break down over time. Do you get what I'm saying? So they might have a 10-year warranty. They last a lot longer if they're put underneath a good layer of mulch and bark, but over time it's gonna break down, and it's gonna allow more weeds to grow up through it. And removing weed barrier fabric is a piece of work, let me tell you what. It is not a fun job to do, but over time you're going to eventually need to replace it, to tear it out, and it is a pain in the patella. So that's another reason not to put it down. The last reason, and well, also when we're talking about weeds in weed barrier fabric, it's really good at keeping weeds from growing up through it, but it's not super great at keeping weeds from growing down. So over time, if you've put bark mulch on, it's going to break down, or dust is going to blow in, and it's going to eventually an environment that is ideal for weed growth, germination is going to take place. Weed seeds will blow in, and they're going to root and go straight down through the weed barrier fabric. And it's so hard to pull those things up, so much harder than if you were just pulling them up out of bare soil. And the reason for that is because they kind of punch her down, and then they go through, and then they, the roots all come out, and then you're trying to pull this huge root system up through a small hole. That was the point of puncture, I guess. I don't know, just where the weed grew down through the weed barrier fabric. But the biggest reason is the way that it changes how roots grow in these areas. So when we tear up weed barrier fabric, what we see is that the roots are all right underneath the surface of the soil in those first few inches. And whether that's a temperature thing, whether it's a watering thing, I'm not really sure, but it's not healthy for plant roots to just stay on the surface of the soil. It compromises their structural integrity. They're gonna not be able to withstand wind as much, and it's gonna compromise drought tolerance if you ever remove these weed barrier fabrics. So anyways, long story short, just don't use them. Don't use them. The only exception is that I would say is if there's an area where you're not going to be planting. Like, let's say that you've got, like that picture that I showed of the almost all turf, or no, not turf. What am I saying? Of the rock mulch, and then the trees. If you give your trees enough room, you could put down this weed barrier fabric in the rest of the bed, and then you just have to make sure that no weeds are getting large enough to grow down through it. Like that application would be fine. Like we tell people all the time to put this like underneath paths and stuff. Under hardscapes is fine. Preen is the way to go. Let me tell you guys what, preen is a gift. So a gift to mankind, that's what it is. Preen is a chemical though, so that is something to be wary of. If you don't like chemicals, don't put chemicals down. what preen does, and preen is, once again, it's a brand name for a pre-emergent. And so pre-emergents stop weeds from germinating. Well, they germinate, but you put it down, you work it into the soil, you water it in, and it creates a very thin layer of chemical at the top of the soil. So as a little seed germinates and it starts to grow up, it's going to hit this layer of chemical, and it's really weak, so it's going to die. Perennial weeds are not going to be affected by this, and the perennials you've planted in your yard are not going to be affected by this. Would I use this in a vegetable garden around plants that I eat? No. Would I use this in a flower bed? Absolutely, I would. I love this stuff. It does break down over time, so you're going to need to reapply it about every 3 to 4 months, depending on what's on the package. It's a chemical, so the number one rule is read and follow the package. But we do have people oftentimes complain and say that preen doesn't work for them, when really they just needed to reapply it. So if you're applying it now, and now's a great time to apply it, you're going to need to reapply it in July, roughly, to make sure that you have full season. But this is really going to cut down on those weeds. And mulching is probably the best thing you can do to cut back on weeds. So whether it's a bark mulch or some kind of other organic mulch, like some people like to use soil pep. Soil pep is just soil or bark that's been broken down like crazy into really fine pieces, and it's almost more of an organic matter that you could just add to the soil. But a lot of people choose that to put on top of their flower beds, which is great. It doesn't move around nearly as bad with the wind as bark mulch does, but you do have to replace it all the time. Bark mulch, wow. You can tell I'm trying to hurry so the class won't be so long, but the gravel mulch is a great way to go. It is going to do a lot of the same functions as the bark mulch does. Pros and cons to both. Pros for bark mulch: it never breaks down, so you're not going to have to replace it. It can get kind of messy if you are doing a lot of planting. So I like bark mulch better, and partially because one of my favorite things about gardening and about landscape design is that landscapes are living things. They change over time. Things are going to die. You're going to put new stuff in. You're going to find a plant you love. Things are going to fill in an area. And as you plant and move stuff around, the gravel mulch can get kind of messy, and it's harder to plant stuff in. So if I, as a horticulturist, was looking at a yard or designing a piece of property, and someone wanted an area with some kind of cover, and they weren't planning on doing a lot of additional gardening in that space, I think that rock mulch is a great way to go. Mulch is a little more forgiving when it comes to, you dig around in it, and you're digging up soil and it gets a little messy. It doesn't look that bad, and you're replacing it. You're adding top layers every couple of years, which that's going to help it keep looking nice and neat. It does break down over time. It's going to add organic matter to the soil over time, which is a really good thing. And it does seem to do a little bit better on managing weeds than rock mulch does. And that's probably mostly a factor of heat. So the rock mulch does heat up quite a bit more than the bark mulch does, but both do good. Both are great. So mostly it's a preference thing. And so we have both here in our learning garden. Both are effective. It's mostly just a matter of preference. So deadheading can be an issue that people think about, but with perennials, you are going to deadhead a whole lot less than annuals. And annuals, you have to buy them every year. They don't survive the winter time. Perennials are going to last at least 3 years. But the deadheading on perennials, so much less. Usually perennials, especially if they're a perennial that has a flush and then they don't really bloom the rest of the year, you're deadheading them once, maybe twice, and that's it. Annuals, you're out there deadheading them every week to make sure they're still blooming. So, which I love annuals. Keep them in pots, keep them on your patio. I have a ton every year. I just don't put them in my flower beds. And then the last step is to enjoy it. So this is our park strip in our learning garden. It's been expanded this year with the construction, and we're working on some new designs. But this is what it looks like. This is probably the end of May, first part of June. We do have this section that has the watermelon, but this is what our perennial section looks like. We really enjoy it. People enjoy looking at it. We've got some good shorter varieties. So our garden is currently closed because of the coronavirus, and we're still working on the construction in the new section of the landscape. So I would recommend, if you guys want to come out and check out our learning garden, wait a month, maybe 2 months, come out in June, and hopefully things will be open and looking really good. Our location is, where Highway 89 and 193 up in northern Layton comes together. But our garden is typically open. Like I said, right now we're living in kind of weird times, and so our garden's been a little bit impacted by that, but we are open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. usually. So come and check us out in a couple of months and see what we've got going. All of our plants, we try to keep them as labeled as possible. If you find a plant that's not labeled you have questions about, you can come talk to us. We're typically here during business hours, and we're happy to help you guys get going on projects. Give us a call if you need. We can help as much as we can remotely. But thanks for joining me for this class. I love perennials. I think that adding more perennials to a landscape does nothing but good. It's going to really increase that curb appeal, and it's going to add a lot of interest to your landscape and help it just be more beautiful, a lot more beautiful, and you're going to save a lot of water. Every year that you don't have grass, you're going to save thousands upon thousands of gallons of water. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Like I said, this presentation will be online hopefully soon, but the actual PowerPoints that I've been using are already online. So thank you.